It has taken me years to do it, but I have finally done it. I have decorated the cover of my Etchr sketchbook. Just recently, Etchr released some new variations of their everyday sketchbook, 2 of which are square and 1 is panoramic in both hot and cold press. And I've created a whole separate video highlighting the ins and outs of those sketchbooks, and I'll leave that linked for you. As Etchr's UK ambassador, I also have a 10% discount, which is Sketches.n, and I'll leave that linked down below for you as well. In this video, I really want to focus on the covers because I've had the everyday sketchbooks for years and I have complained about the covers for years, but I have never decorated them. But the day has come, and as I do so, I will also share the things that worked and the things that didn't, so that if you also want to decorate your own, you'll have success on the first go. The first key thing is gesso, but I recommend that before you paint or add gesso, you stick tape facing upwards towards the cover. If I were to touch this tape, it would stick onto my fingers, if that makes sense. So the tape is actually outward, and this protects the pages inside the sketchbook when you paint and when you gesso over them. Like, gesso is your friend. I ended up using this Winsor & Newton white gesso, put it on, left it to dry, and then the next day it's almost like I had the perfect canvas to start on. The instruction says, use 2 coats, but I found that because the cover itself is white, 1 coat was more than enough, and it kind of got rid of all the mess that was there and gave me a good surface for which to work on. I'm gonna be honest, I like plain covers. I don't put stickers on my covers. I don't like crazy patterns or anything like that. So I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with this, but I thought I would just start, and if I hate it, I'll just paint all over it. Here I am using the artist Pitt pens, and as you can see, they work brilliantly on the gessoed cover. You are able to blend the colors quite nicely if the pens are still wet, but once they're dry, they are waterproof and they won't reactivate or move around. Also with the Pitt pens, they cover the grain and the tooth of the sketchbook very well, so you can kind of get blocks of color in. Next, I tried watercolor, and admittedly I didn't use any watercolor ground on this, and that might be something that I experiment with next time. But the watercolor worked and it didn't. It worked in the sense that, as you can see, I can put the colors down and I'm getting like some really nice, beautiful blends. Some of the drawbacks were that it didn't cover the full tooth of the sketchbook, so you can still kind of see the grainy nature of the sketchbook. For some, that will be fine. For others, that will be distracting. So I guess it just depends on what you are looking for. And then the other thing was that as the watercolor dried, it was really easy to get harsh lines, not quite cauliflowers, but just like harsh lines where the watercolor was drying and it just wasn't blending with anything else. So it was a bit of a learning curve with it, and I think in the end I ended up covering quite a lot of the watercolor with other mediums. Next, I am trying acrylic inks, and honestly I feel like acrylic paint and acrylic inks were most successful with this endeavor. The Pitt pens worked too, but I feel like hands down the acrylic inks, as you can see, I can just get the colors down. You can get some blending if you want. You can get some straight lines if you want. I just felt like I could get both control and no control depending on what I wanted, but the colors were nice and vibrant, and as a whole the acrylic inks just worked a lot better than the watercolors did. Also got like good block solid colors, so I can't see the grain of the sketchbook anymore, so that was a win. I was really in 2 minds as to what to actually create for these sketchbooks. As I've said, I tend to like really plain looking sketchbooks, is why I love like the signature series, because there's nothing on there. So this was really a creative trial, but I have been enjoying abstract art pieces that I have been creating recently, and that's how I started off this sketchbook as well. So I was kind of inspired by that and to kind of keep going with that, but I didn't want to have any white space. So in the end, I just decided to paint my cover blue, okay? But I did it with so many different medias, my hope being that then it would be able to inform you should you want to do this in your own sketchbooks, and know that acrylic inks work really well. Acrylic paints also work very well. The Pitt pens work well. Watercolors can work, but are not the greatest. I'm showing you the harsh lines that I was referring to. This would also happen when I got water happy and just added way too much water. I may try to do it again with watercolor ground, but I just feel like if I want a lot of coverage, it wouldn't be my first choice. But I don't know, I'm kind of curious. I may try it. Next, I also tried the Neo Color 2s, and this kind of worked and it didn't. It works in the sense that you can put it down and you can layer, but again, you just see the tooth of the sketchbook because it's so prominent. So if you like seeing that texture and you're happy with it, then that's fine. If you don't like seeing that texture, then perhaps avoid using the Neo colors. Also didn't blend well together. I did try to wet them as well, and that technically worked, but it ended up looking very chalky. I could still see the grain of the sketchbook. So I don't know if it's because I was using a really light color or just that the Neo Color 2s in general didn't work as well. I tried to use a slightly darker blue. Again, it wasn't the best effect. And so I went back to the acrylic inks, which ultimately I think worked best in this case. I did also use these bottles of acrylics that I have mixed myself to add extra details. And again, I think that that worked very nicely. I am quite curious to know if you have decorated the Etchr sketchbooks before, and if you did, what your experience was with it, what worked and what didn't, just so that we can, make sure that we don't make the same mistakes. And if you haven't decorated it yet, then let me know in the comments what you would put on the cover, paint or draw or otherwise. Given that I love florals, I was toying with the idea of doing like a floral motif at the front of the sketchbook. So here I'm just practicing, I guess, different designs, trying to figure out how I would do it within the inside of the sketchbook. So not actually committing it to the cover as of yet. And I had this idea of just having white florals and white leaves and have that contrast against the bluey background that I have created. In the end, I must admit, I decided to leave it as it was. I kind of liked the simplicity of the blue sketchbook, and I liked the fact that the more I looked or the more attention I paid to it, the more I could see the different medias that I had used and the different colors. So the sketchbook remains blue. Now, this is the bit where time will tell whether I made a genius move or a mistake. That is around sealing the cover of the sketchbook, because ultimately I want it to be waterproof, and I had used watercolors as well as other water soluble medias. So I feel like if you're using acrylics, it should be somewhat okay because it's going to dry waterproof. However, if you were like me and used a range of different medias, then it might be worth considering a way to seal it. I am going to tell you what I did because it's still holding strong. However, if I find a better way to do this, then I will leave that in the description. So I recommend that before you try this out, you check out the description to see if there's an update. But essentially what I did was I sprayed on pastel fixative onto the cover first, hope being that that would give some sort of protective barrier. And then I took PVA glue and put it over the top. I was worried that putting PVA glue straight on would just reactivate all the water soluble media, and a week in, it seems fine. I've dropped water on it as well just to test it to see if anything happens. So far, so good, no issues. So we shall see, time will tell. I think an alternative could also be Dorland's wax and then maybe PVA glue. As I say, I don't know, or maybe Dorland's wax on its own is fine. I'm going to do a few tests. I'm curious to know what other people have tried and what's worked for them. And once we find a general consensus, I will leave it updated in the description. To my surprise, I not only enjoyed the process, but I love my cover. So I am actually going to be decorating my other ones. If you are still watching, then you are a real MVP, and I really, really, really appreciate you. Let me know that you are still watching by telling me whether you would decorate the cover of the sketchbook before you start it or after you finished it, or like me, when you're in the middle of it. If you enjoyed this video, then you will definitely love this next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.